Hi everyone, and welcome to another installment of Terrifying Trios. Just in time for Halloween, we're going to be focusing on Japanese horror. Content warning. The following movies and books contain scenes of graphic violence, including death, dismemberment, body horror, and more. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. And as always, spoilers ahead. Please note that while both movies have been out for over 20 years, the books I'll discuss here were released within the past 5 years. If you are spoiler averse, please check out the titles listed in the description of this video before returning. Our first film this month is Ringu, which was released in 1998. Adapted from the novel by Koji Suzuki, it was a huge hit in Japan and internationally, leading to an English-language remake, as well as various sequels and spin-offs, and other media exploring Sadako, the frightening figure at the heart of this tale, which autocorrect fittingly tries to turn into Circle. Let's explore this haunting story and its enduring appeal. The movie begins with two high school girls, Tomoko and Masami. The pair are talking about a rumor that says, if you watch a certain video, in 7 days, you'll die. While Masami laughs at the creepy story, Tomoko admits that she and 3 friends watched a weird video exactly 7 days before. The ringing of the phone downstairs startles them both, but it's just Tomoko's mother, saying she'll be home a little late. Masami goes to the bathroom, and while she's gone, Tomoko sees the TV turn itself on, and then something off-screen kills her. Next, we meet Reiko Asakawa. She's a reporter who's investigating the urban legend of the cursed video, and we soon learn that she's also Tomoko's aunt. At Tomoko's funeral, Reiko's young son Yoichi explores Tomoko's darkened bedroom, and Reiko learns from some students paying their respects that Tomoko wasn't the only person to die. 3 other students also died mysteriously on the same day, and all had visited a cabin in Izu the previous week. Reiko travels to Izu and finds the cabin where the 4 students stayed. In the office, she spots a blank video cassette, and back in the cabin, Reiko watches the tape. It's strange, and definitely creepy. We see someone looking down from a circular hole, kanji and other Japanese characters that move and spell eruption. 2 reflections of women in a mirror, someone with their face covered standing by the sea, and weird voices. The video ends with a shot of a well, and then Reiko receives a phone call with audio from the video on the other end. She hurries to leave the cabin, taking the tape with her. If the curse is real, she has 7 days to break it. The first person that Reiko reaches out to is her ex-husband, Ryuji Takayama. He's a university professor, but he also has what seem to be psychic abilities. The two do some research and learn that some of the weird audio on the tape is a kind of saying in Oshima dialect, and that a woman in Oshima predicted a volcanic eruption decades before, and was known for being able to predict the future. Before leaving for Oshima, Reiko takes Yoichi to stay with her father. That night, Reiko wakes up and is horrified to find Yoichi watching the cursed tape. She asks him why he did it, and he tells her that Tomoko told him to. As they ride the ferry to Oshima, Ryuji acknowledges that the thing that spoke to Yoichi wasn't really Tomoko anymore. He and Reiko agree that they're dealing with a real curse. In Oshima, Reiko and Ryuji stay at an inn and meet an old man named Takashi, whose cousin, Shizuko Yamamura, was the psychic who predicted the volcanic eruption. She also appears in the videotape. She's the woman brushing her hair and looking in the mirror. Decades ago, her psychic abilities were tested by a Professor Ikuma, and though she proved herself publicly in front of members of the press, one reporter declared that it must be a hoax. When Ryuji confronts Takashi on the beach, he and Reiko can both see a bit of what happened that fateful day. The reporter was killed by a girl named Sadako, who is Shizuko's daughter, probably with Professor Ikuma, and whose psychic powers were so strong that she was able to kill people with her mind. With only a day left until her death from the curse, Reiko finds that her wrist is bruised where Sadako grabbed her in the vision. A storm makes it so leaving Oshima will be difficult. Ryuji and Reiko finally realize that after Ryuji watched the video, he didn't receive a phone call, but everyone who watched it in the cabin in Izu did. So, Takashi reluctantly agrees to take the pair by boat back to the mainland. There, Ryuji buys ropes, buckets, and shovels, and Reiko calls Yoichi, though she can't bring herself to say goodbye. Beneath the cabin in Izu, Reiko and Ryuji find a hidden well. Another vision reveals that Sadako was killed by her father, or rather, Professor Akuma hit her in the head and sent her plummeting into the well. But the bloody, torn-off fingernails sticking out of the stone reveal that she was still alive for some time, trapped in the water at the bottom of the well as she slowly died. Ryuji climbs inside and begins filling the buckets, and Reiko pulls them up and dumps the water until she collapses from exhaustion hours later. Finally, the two trade places, but it's already after 6 p.m., and Reiko knows she watched the video 7 days ago, a little after 7 p.m. Once she's inside the well, she feels around for Sadako's body, and soon finds her hair. A hand grabs her again, but by this time, Reiko is no longer afraid. She's relieved to see Sadako, and embraces her skeleton. At this point, Ryuji calls down that it's well after 7 p.m. The curse must be broken. Later, after the police arrive to collect Sadako's remains, Ryuji drives Reiko home. The two part as friends, and the next day, Reiko is resting at home when she tries to call Ryuji. It's at this point that Ryuji, working on an essay in his office, sees his TV turn on. It looks like the strange video is playing, but this time it continues past the point where it originally ended. The chilling figure of Sadako, dressed in white, her long black hair covering her face, climbs out of the well, then out of the TV, and Ryuji can only watch, horrified, as she slowly approaches him, and ultimately uses her psychic power to kill him. Reiko is grief-stricken upon hearing of Ryuji's death, but she's also frantic about Yoichi. Since the curse clearly isn't broken after all, he's going to die the next day, unless she can find a way to save him. Back at home, Reiko tries to think of what was different about her and Ryuji. What did she do that he didn't? Then, in the reflection of her TV screen, Reiko sees what looks like Ryuji's spirit. His face is covered, and he's pointing to her bag. When she turns around, he's gone. But when she looks inside her bag, Reiko finds the copy she made of the videotape. Now she understands. You won't die from watching the video if you copy it and have someone else watch it. The film ends with Reiko driving toward her father's house, her VHS player and recorder on the seat beside her. She calls to ask for a favor, saying that it's for Yoichi. Side note, it's unclear whether or not this could work indefinitely. If people watch the video, make a copy, and then have someone else do the same, would anyone else die? While the death masks of Sadako's victims are scarier in the English version, this film is unmatched for its pacing, characters, and the curse system it builds into technology. I give Ringu 4 curse people out of 5. Our next film is Ju-on, The Grudge, which was released in 2002. One interesting thing about this film is the way it plays with time. We first meet Rika, a social worker, when she visits a house to check on an elderly woman. As she's cleaning the mess she finds, she ventures upstairs and finds a black cat trapped in a closet, who suddenly disappears, leaving a boy in its place. Rika tries to call someone at the social services agency where she works to figure out who the boy is. He says his name is Toshio. We soon learn, and actually see snatches of this in the prologue of the film, that Toshio was killed in the house along with his mother and the family's cat. The killer was Toshio's father, Takeo, who was later killed by the vengeful ghost of Kayako, Toshio's mother, and Takeo's wife. Rika faints after seeing the shadowy figure of Kayako appearing to murder the old woman, and from this point on, the spirits of Toshio, Kayako, and even their black cat follow her. At this point, the movie jumps back in time a bit. We meet Kazumi, whose mother-in-law is the old woman Rika came to check on. Her husband, Katsuya, leaves his wife and mother to go to work, and Kazumi finds herself menaced by spirits. When Katsuya returns home and finds his wife apparently catatonic, he's about to call for help, when he seems to be possessed by Takeo's spirit. It's at this point that Katsuya's younger sister Hitomi comes over for dinner, and Katsuya convinces her to leave the house. In the next scene, we see Hitomi followed by the curse. A security guard is killed in her office building, and though she makes it home, she disappears after we see a ghost pull her under a blanket. After this, we meet Toyama, a former police officer who was assigned to the case of the murders of Kayako and Toshio years before. He tells his young daughter Izumi to go home without him, then agrees to speak with the police about the recent strange events at the clearly cursed house. By this time, Rika's visit has already happened, and she's begun to recover. She briefly crosses paths with Toyama. Meanwhile, Katsuya, Kazumi, and Hitomi have all disappeared. We later see the bodies of the former two discovered in the attic of the house. Toyama watches the CCTV video, in which a shadow engulfs the security guard at Hitomi's office. Then he watches in horror as it moves toward the camera. Soon after this, Toyama becomes convinced that the only way to stop the vengeful spirits is to burn down the house. However, he's about to pour gasoline around the kitchen when he encounters a teenage girl fleeing the house. She and her friends snuck in, but after the two make eye contact, the girl leaves while her friends remain upstairs. Toyama goes to try and get them out, but then the house goes dark. Toyama manages to get out of the house, but the two detectives investigating the case who followed him inside are killed after his departure. We later learn that Toyama also died days or weeks after leaving the house. We then meet his daughter, Izumi, now a teenager, after 3 of her friends have disappeared. These were the 3 that she snuck inside the haunted house with. Like her father before her, we meet Izumi before she's cursed, but then she begins to change. In a matter of days, she starts to cover her windows with newsprint and won't leave the apartment where she and her mother live. In photographs 2 friends show her, the missing girls' faces are distorted by a dark haze, and so is Izumi's. She dreams of the time she met her father in the house. He saw the future, and she saw the past. Izumi is menaced by the spirits of the friends she left behind, and she too disappears after being dragged into the darkness behind the family altar. In the last part of the film, we're reunited with Rika. She's trying to move on from the unsettling experience she had in the house, but while out with her friend Mariko, a teacher, she sees Toshio's ghost again. Later, Rika learns that Mariko has gone to the house of a student who hasn't shown up for school, and it's Toshio's house. Rika hurries over to try and save her friend, but instead she can only watch in terror as Mariko is dragged away by Kayako. As she runs downstairs to try and escape, Rika realizes that she can see the spirits of the family that's haunting her when she looks through the gaps in her fingers, and she recognizes that everyone who sets foot in this house is cursed by the terrible rage of both Takeo and Kayako. Rika is killed by Takeo, and it seems certain that more deaths will follow as long as the house still stands, though the ghosts obviously aren't confined to the house either. The grudge of the title refers to the fact that Takeo, having murdered his family, was then murdered by Kayako's vengeful ghost, and now this pair of angry spirits have created a dangerous sort of feedback loop, which fuels the power of the haunted house. And their ghosts can travel, too. The fact that they can follow people elsewhere and kill them makes the curse that much more disturbing. I find it telling that in the American remake of this film, the protagonist, Karen, survives, whereas in the original, Rika dies despite her good intentions. She enters the house hoping to help the family there, and even after she understands the nature of the curse following her, she can't escape it. In this way, it seems the manner of her death was simply her destiny. While American horror and the idea of the final girl can often come off as a lesson in morality, that is, if you are smart, good, and brave enough, maybe you can survive the impossible, Rika can only accept her fate. The rage of the murdered dead is something she can't fix, and there's no surviving it. Whether you're a social worker, a cop, or a thrill-seeking teen, once you enter the house in this film, your fate is sealed, and you will die horribly. For me, this is what sets Ju-on apart from Ringu. There is no loophole, no escape from the curse. I give this film 6 black cats out of 8. Last, this month's book is Junji Ito's Dissolving Classroom. In it, a boy in high school can't stop apologizing to everyone he meets. He has a younger sister, who seems a little odd, and the pair are apparently orphans. In each story, their history is slightly different, but one thing remains the same. People who cross paths with these strange siblings die, but they don't just fall over dead. They seem to melt from the inside out. We eventually learn that the boy, Yuma, has a strange sort of power. The more you hear his voice, the more you start to dissolve. And his little sister, Chizumi, well, he's responsible for her. And the food she likes best is the liquid that results when people dissolve. All of this melting mayhem culminates in Yuma making a public apology to the people who have suffered because of him. But of course, the amplification of his voice only results in the deaths of everyone present, and afterward, the brother and sister disappear. In Dissolving Classroom, the characters are doomed from the moment the story begins, other than the siblings whose fate is unclear. If someone survives, it's usually because of sheer luck, or because someone, either a doctor or bystander, saves the person just in time. They don't escape a terrible fate because they made the right choices or acted in a way that readers might deem moral or strategic. And even if they survive in the short term, as with the protagonist of the first story, she's dead by the end of the book, since the journalist she tried to warn about the sinister siblings turned out to be, it seems, the devil himself. Briefly, I'm going to touch on a few other stories by Junji Ito, because the concept of being doomed by the narrative is a recurring theme. The Enigma of Amigara Fault is one of Junji Ito's most famous tales. It appears in the collection Venus in the Blind Spot, though you can also find it online, and in it, people from all over Japan find themselves captivated by a strange phenomenon. Following an earthquake that reveals an ancient fault in a mountainside, mysterious holes shaped like people appear. In studying them, scientists determined that the holes are almost as ancient as the mountain they were carved into. But what long-forgotten civilization possessed such technology? Our protagonists, a young man named Owaki and a young woman named Yoshida, traveled to the fault because they were both fascinated by the story of the human-shaped holes. But after a man named Nakagaki disappears into one of the holes, Yoshida tells Owaki why she really came to the Amigara Fault. She saw her hole in the TV coverage of the phenomenon. That is to say, there's a hole that looks exactly like her. Owaki is skeptical, but then others disappear into holes in the mountain. One young man famously shouts, "This is my hole. It was made for me." That first night, Owaki has a nightmare in which he is Nakagaki, and he's trapped inside the mountain, surrounded by rock on all sides. The next day, Yoshida confesses that she's terrified of going into her hole. She's sure she'll die inside, but she can feel it calling to her. To comfort her, Owaki fills the hole with rocks, and the two spend the night together. But after Owaki has another nightmare, in which he is part of the ancient society that created the human-shaped holes and used them to punish criminals, he wakes to find Yoshida gone. Her hole, which was filled with rocks earlier that night, is now empty. Clearly she has gone inside. And when Owaki drops his flashlight, he accidentally discovers his hole. Looking resigned to his fate, Owaki removes his clothes and steps inside, just like all the previous victims of the mountain. Months later, scientists discover something horrifying on the other side of the fault, the other end of the holes, and how they reshape their human occupants. All this is to say that in these tales, part of the fear readers feel is that the terrifying thing that the characters have encountered is inescapable. No matter what they do, they can't avoid what fate has in store for them. Sometimes, fate takes the form of an ancient rock formation. In the title story, in Venus in the Blind Spot, the titular young woman is killed as a result of her father's actions. If it's your destiny, there's nothing you can do. An action as seemingly innocuous as stepping into a furniture store can lead to a horrible end. Japanese horror can be described in terms of the conspicuous visual tropes that make it unique. The ghastly figure of Sadako, as well as milk-white children who haunt the living. But I'd argue that its enduring popularity is rooted in the fact that these books and films explore universal fears. After all, I think child ghosts are scary in every culture, even when they're more to be pitied than feared. Perhaps the main element of Japanese horror that gets to us is the idea of inevitability. Whether you really believe it or not, most of us enjoy the concept of free will. It's nice to think that your actions will determine the course of your life. However, horror movies like Ringu and Ju-on, as well as the stories of Junji Ito, present the possibility that you have very little say in what fate has in store for you. And of course, this may be a difference between Japanese viewers and American viewers. What is the difference between doom and destiny? I think horror often combines the two, and that's something that scares us. The idea of living a peaceful life and dying a swift death is very different from dying in agony from a curse you couldn't escape. Yes, everyone dies, but there are good deaths. Horror mostly presents us with terrible ones, and while some curses can be broken, the curse, or blessing, of mortality isn't one of them. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another terrifying trio.